Okay, let's get back to the prospect of new pipelines in Canada. There is a three-way dance going on among the Prime Minister, Mr. Carney, Alberta's Premier, Danielle Smith, and the BC Premier, David Eby, over the issue of building new pipelines through BC.
The federal government's push to build a new pipeline from Alberta to Canada's west coast has been met with contention. But new polling by Ipsos shows that a majority of Canadians are on board.
The clock is not just ticking, it has been strategically set as Southbow's pipeline decision deadline races toward late May. It lands just weeks before the critical CUSMA review revealing a calculated move Canada is using to shift leverage in a trade fight. Washington thought it had already won. What looks like timing is actually pressure, and it is about to peak. The Prairie Connector would carry 450,000 barrels per day from Hardisty, Alberta to the US Gulf Coast. That is a 12% increase in Canada's total crude exports to the United States, layered on top of the 4 million barrels per day already flowing south. The route runs through Saskatchewan to the US border, where Bridger Pipeline has already filed a proposal in Montana for a 1,038-kilometer line carrying up to 550,000 barrels per day toward Guernsey. Wyoming connecting to Cushing, Oklahoma and the Gulf Coast through existing infrastructure. Mark Carney raised this pipeline by name with Donald Trump personally in the Oval Office in October, before Southbow had made any public announcement before the open season was launched. The groundwork was planted months before the commercial process began. To understand why a pipeline carries this kind of strategic weight, the history of what came before it matters. The original Keystone XL was first proposed in 2008, designed to move Canadian oil sands heavy crude from Hardisty to Gulf Coast refineries, built specifically to process it. The match between what those refineries require and what Alberta produces is not a commercial preference, it is an engineering constraint. Gulf Coast refineries are specialized, expensive, and calibrated to heavy sour crude. They need a specific type of oil to run at full capacity. That oil comes from a small number of places in the world: Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Canada. Venezuelan exports have been collapsing for years, Mexican production is declining, the Strait of Hormuz, through which Iraqi and Saudi heavy crude flows, has been effectively closed since February 28th. Canadian oil sands crude is what remains. It is heavy, reliable, and comes from a neighbor with a shared land border. Keystone XL became one of the most politically contested infrastructure projects in American history. Obama killed it, Trump revived it in his first term, Biden canceled it on his first day in office in 2021. 5 years of uncertainty, billions in stranded investment, and a pipeline that never reached the Gulf Coast. But here is what most coverage missed. On the Canadian side, TC Energy, the company that owned the project, had already built significant sections in Alberta before the cancellation. That pipe is still in the ground. Those permits from the Canada Energy Regulator remain valid. TC Energy later spun off its oil pipeline business into Southbow. Southbow looked at that stranded infrastructure and recognized something: the Canadian side already has a head start. The Prairie Connector would work within a pre-invested corridor, using infrastructure already in the ground and reducing both the timeline and cost of construction compared to a greenfield project. Southbow's CEO said it plainly during an earnings call. Working within that pre-invested corridor ups the chances of quickly advancing construction. American approvals are moving. On March 24th, Reuters reported that the White House confirmed the Trump administration is actively working with Canada on the permitting required for the Prairie Connector. The entire energy team at the White House is engaged in that process. This is not background bureaucratic work. It is a political signal from an administration that wants the pipeline to happen. The leverage mechanism is straightforward once the context is clear. Carney can walk into the final stage of CUSMA negotiations in June or July carrying a specific and concrete offer. Canada has a pipeline delivering 450,000 barrels per day of exactly the crude that Gulf Coast refineries need for decades, creating American jobs in Montana, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and Texas, and providing energy security at a moment when Middle Eastern supply is severely disrupted. That pipeline requires American permitting approvals to proceed. Those approvals are easier to give when CUSMA is functioning, and tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and automobiles are resolved. The deal is not written in any press release. It does not need to be. Every energy executive and trade negotiator in both countries understands the structure without having it explained. Southbow's CEO framed it carefully but unmistakably. He said customers have relayed that under the right policy environment, there is an ability for them to grow. Right policy environment is direct language for what it means. If the trade relationship stabilizes, if the tariff pressure reduces, the commercial backing for this pipeline arrives from oil producers willing to make binding long-term. Shipping commitments, the commercial support, and the trade environment are linked variables. Strathcona Resources CEO Adam Waterous stated it even more directly, noting that the Prairie Connector could be used to ease trade tensions between the two countries. That is not diplomatic hedging. It is a description of the exact mechanism at work. The Prairie Connector does not exist in isolation within Canada's energy strategy. Trans Mountain, the Pacific-facing pipeline that runs from Alberta to Burnaby on the BC coast, reached near full capacity in April 2026, 2 years ahead of schedule. More than 60% of its volumes are now shipping to China. Canada already has a functioning alternative to the American market for Alberta heavy crude. That alternative is operational and at capacity. The Prairie Connector is not a concession to US demand. It is a leverage instrument offered on Canada's terms, available when the trade environment justifies it. Trans Mountain is the diversification that reduces dependence. The Prairie Connector is the card played in negotiations. 2 pipelines, 2 directions, 1 coherent strategy. The implications for ordinary Canadians are concrete. At current oil prices, 450,000 barrels per day generates substantial royalty revenue for Alberta and significant corporate tax revenue federally. That money flows into healthcare, education, and retirement programs across every province. Canadian pension funds, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, the OMERS, all carry significant energy sector exposure. A pipeline that unlocks additional Alberta production at scale supports those valuations and the retirement savings of millions of Canadians at the pump and in heating bills. A more stable North American oil supply with reduced dependence on disrupted Middle Eastern shipping routes means less price volatility for Canadian households already absorbing cost pressure from over a year of trade war impacts. The risks deserve equal clarity. The Prairie Connector is not approved, not funded, and not built. Southbow has not yet confirmed whether the commercial backing collected during the open season is sufficient to proceed. That determination arrives at the end of May. If producers are not willing to make binding long-term shipping commitments, the project does not advance. If the Southbow assessment is negative, this particular leverage instrument disappears from the CUSMA table, though Canada retains everything else it has built over 18 months of active trade diversification. Even a positive Southbow decision does not guarantee the pipeline. Environmental and Indigenous opposition to the original Keystone XL route was intense and is not resolved by the project changing its name. Legal challenges can delay construction for years, regardless of political approvals. Trump approved Keystone XL in his first term, and it was canceled anyway. Approvals extended under one political configuration can be withdrawn under another. And Trump's domestic political demands on dairy, alcohol, and streaming regulations are not tradable for a pipeline. Regardless of how urgently Gulf Coast refiners want the supply, his base expects those concessions from Canada, independent of anything Canada offers in energy. What the Prairie Connector does is strengthen Canada's negotiating position in a specific and measurable way. It gives Carney something real to offer that aligns with the commercial interests of American energy companies who carry political weight in exactly the states that matter to Trump's coalition. It creates mutual benefit where there was previously only pressure. It transforms a unilateral American demand into a bilateral negotiation where both sides have something to gain from resolution. That is not a guarantee of an outcome. It is a fundamentally different negotiating dynamic than the one Washington assumed it had created when the trade war began. The 60-day Southbow assessment ends around May 29th. The CUSMA deadline is July 1st. The sequencing was designed, the pipeline was raised in October before the open season existed. Trans Mountain is already full, and sending oil to Asia, the leverage is real, the timing is deliberate, and the negotiating table in June looks different from either side than it did 12 months ago.